Hi all, thanks for joining.
Good afternoon all. Just let a few more people in and then we'll start. Do you want to start the animation, Manu?
The Strategic Innovation Fund is investing £450 million in energy network innovation because the challenge of rapidly decarbonising our energy networks is enormous. But we can do this. With collaboration, we can make the leap. A giant leap together. We need the bravest, brightest, boldest change makers from across the world to work with Innovate UK, Ofgem and the Strategic Innovation Fund to create the energy networks of the future. The best ideas targeted at the most pressing challenges that reduce emissions and save consumers money. Join us now. Take a giant leap together with the Strategic Innovation Fund at ofgem.gov.uk.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for what promises to be a fantastic set of show and tells covering some of the Strategic Innovation Fund's whole system integration challenge discovery projects. My name is Matt Hastings and I'm the Deputy Director for the Fund here at Innovate UK. I'd like to start just by sending a huge thanks to all of the participating energy networks, especially the innovation teams and their third-party partners who have really put in the graft during the last couple of months. Now, as with any new process, it can take you out of your comfort zone at times and there can be niggles and areas for improvement, but you have really embraced this new discovery mechanism head on, and for this we're hugely grateful. Now, the Strategic Innovation Fund has a very clear vision to deliver net zero at lowest cost to consumers and to turn the UK into the Silicon Valley of energy. Whilst it's hard to say given the current external environment, we do feel we can make the UK the best place in the world to be an energy consumer and the best place in the world to be an energy entrepreneur. Supporting UK consumers and driving business growth to deliver net zero is why we're all here. Now, our mission has three major pillars: strategic alignment with other funders and other sectors, delivering fully and agile, the challenges, the discovery alpha beta mechanism, as well as the way that the SIF team operates as a unit. And critically, to focus on business as usual and commercialization. We're trying to discover the new products and services of the future that will benefit consumers and drive down costs and reduce emissions. Consumers, planet, business.
I think I understand it. These things
this is
take
the
time.
purpose of the SIF.
But then,
if you could kindly go on mute if you're not on mute, that would be appreciated. And as per the animation, we're on this giant leap together towards decarbonisation. Now, none of us have a monopoly on great ideas, so working together across the sector is how we plan to succeed. The giant leap together has four phases. We start with challenge setting, and you would have seen recently that we released our round 2 challenges for launch in September. This is then followed by targeted ideation, where we point great ideas at great networks, followed by incubation, where networks can build their consortia, and finally into acceleration, where the challenge is open and we will join the ENA, networks, Ofgem, BEIS and others in hosting the first ever UK Energy Innovation Summit this year, 28th, 29th of September in Glasgow. The round 1 discovery projects that you're going to hear from are in acceleration. And if you talk to some of the teams who've been delivering, they'll recognise that it's been quite intense. But speed is really essential here. We need to move quickly, we need to take risks, and we need to deliver the value that consumers are looking for as fast as humanly possible. And let's pause a little bit to talk about the F word, failure. Some of these projects will have failed, and that's not a dirty word. That is the very nature of discovery. These should not be judged negatively, quite the opposite. A positive failure to us equals a quick learning. It equals a faster route to find the best solution. And instead of just fail fast, we prefer learn fast. This is a key aim of the fund. Finally, I just wanted to thank the Innovate UK team, David Richardson, Kate Jones and Mani Ravishankar on the innovation team, as well as Christine Koenig, Tom Poole and Amy Oswin on the PMO, plus Paul Whittemore on comms and Paul Powder-Ruth on commercial. Also, a big thanks to our monitoring officers and expert panels. They have all worked incredibly hard to support the discovery phase, and without them and without our network colleagues and their third-party partners, there would be no fund. So thank you all for your hard work to get to this point. The best is yet to come. Over to you, Manu.
Thanks, Matt. So, so I'll provide a quick overview of the whole systems integration challenge. So my name is Manu Ravishankar. I'm an innovation lead working on the SIF with Innovate UK. So as you all know, meeting the net zero commitment is a systems transition journey and one that needs whole systems thinking and approaches. And the value of the whole value of taking a whole systems approach has been estimated by several people, and I'm not going to repeat some of the conclusions, but the common finding is it is significant and certainly worth pursuing. So the aims that we set out in the challenge last year were to improve coordination between networks and other system participants, to reduce duplication and excessive variation of products, processes, and services, to reduce complexity, bureaucracy, and barriers to entry, to improve coordination of emerging innovations across networks, generators, market participants, investors, local policymakers, and other key stakeholders, and also importantly, to understand consumer preferences to inform future market design, which will help us to optimize across network and also across wider infrastructure. So some of the specific areas of scope that we'd asked the whole systems integration projects to consider were to coordinate energy transmission, distribution, and system operation across gas and electricity, to coordinate approach to siting assets to deliver more efficient capital investment on the energy system, to evaluate the costs and opportunities of repurposing or decommissioning existing infrastructure and/or assets, and finally, how to maximize efficiency in large-scale network and system investments by taking a whole systems view across generation and demand changes linked to net zero and decarbonization. So we've grouped the whole systems integration projects into 4 themes, as you can see on the slides. So going clockwise, we've got increasing flexibility sources in the energy system. We've got hydrogen deployment and integration. We've got circular economy for resource efficiency and new technology development for renewable energy integration. So the bottom 2 boxes were covered in the session today morning, and we're going to be focusing on increasing flexibility and hydrogen deployment and integration. So a quick run through the session. So as I was saying, the flexibility theme starts first. So we've got presentations on fast flex and incentive. And what we're going to do is then, because we've got 4 projects in the first thing, we're going to break them into 2 each, and then break for a 15-minute Q&A session. And similarly, we'll kind of finish off the next 2. And then finally, in the hydrogen integration project, we'll have 3 presentations followed by a Q&A and closing the session. So if I can ask everyone to please consider the questions that you want to ask and put them into the Q&A, or rather the kind of chat box. I'll pick them up and put it to the presenters during the Q&A session. So without further ado, if I can hand over to the Fast Flex Consortium, is that to Goran?
Oh, hello, colleagues.
Hi, Goran. Can you? Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, something wrong now, but I needed to restart my Wi-Fi, but this is now looks this is now okay.
You're fine. You're here.
Yeah, we have carried out analysis which quantifies the value of this fastless concept in supporting more cost-effective transition to this low-carbon system, but focusing on this is very much focused on the frequency stability and taking into account these differences between different regions. If we go, as I said, the call is aspect to quantify the benefits, but addressing the regional frequency stability between the regions, and through using this demand side flexibility, kind of new concepts rather than historical technologies, so forth. So if we go to next one. Yeah, this is just to say that in this was the focus was on this see what is the cost benefit analysis of demand side flexibility. But the focus is on in Scotland. We'll see what the issues are in terms of the larger rock off and potentially unstable situation given the reduction in inertia. And we have look at these kind of two approaches. One is this, to use this advanced control demand side flexibility versus using batteries of synchronous condensers, which is the traditional approach. And to see kind of where the pros and cons are, and also what are the benefits, what is the volume of savings which this control approach will be able to deliver, given that we are now shifting towards a digitalized framework, that this will be very, very important. So the next slide just shows this is the regional frequency stability. Is a big issue, and obviously this is also driven by the fact that, as I mentioned, this is a reduction in system inertia because we got renewables, and also there is this HVDC connections, and in Scotland this is just assumption going to be 1.4 gigawatts, and if that fails, then that will be a problem. And you can see at the right bottom these diagrams, the red and the blue one, showing the difference in frequencies changes, so they're not the same, and the red one is kind of in Scotland. And you can see that showing that the rate of change of frequency in Scotland, if we lose, if there is a loss in generation or this interconnection, would be bigger than in England, and that if we ignore this spatial variability, we would then potentially have a higher rock off, and this would potentially lead to blackouts, and this needs to be addressed strongly. So the next slide is just a quick showing that we are going to use we use our auxiliary services constrained energy scheduling model, which is kind of very advanced modeling. Just to say, one of the core challenges which is being solved with this modeling is to have a to optimize the system operation, looking into kind of timescales of hours, because if you want to switch on and off generators, that takes time, but at the same time looking into the auxiliary services dynamics, which is a millisecond timescale, and putting this together is where this model has is pretty unique in that context. And also we have also updated to include demand side and also this spatial distribution of frequency changes. So if we go to next one, I know we got sorry, maybe I'm running already. So what was in this ACES model is that we have expanded the model to include this regional demand side response, because that is very important, and also characterization of those. And the current profiles consider, it says, electric vehicles and heat pump, and we used national grid phase scenarios focused on 2030, and so just to say that this was based on those scenarios, and the focus on analysis in 2030. So we go to next slide. This is showing the kind of the core results of the modeling. That value of this of having fast flex concept in Scotland, it's you can see kind of 440 million pounds per year, and that's all to do with this, as we discussed. That there will be less investment in a conventional grid, but these are the benefits which this concept can provide compared to synchronous condensers or battery storage, which is a kind of in inverted commas, it is the conventional approach. And we have also, this was done based on the analysis of the zero carbon operation in Scotland. You can see in here we have estimated there was about 1 gigawatt of demand response with electric vehicles and heat pumps, and that could that demonstrated could replace 10 gigawatt amps of social condensers and 5 megawatts of battery storage, which is obviously very, very significant. And also one of the core aspects of that is that if you got a demand response, then you can actually schedule the amount and the volumes, which depends on the system conditions. Because, you know, if wind is very high and demand is low, then the ancillary services value is very significant. But in other occasions, if wind is blowing less hard and demand is hard, then that will be, you know, much lower value and, you know, lower requirement. And you can then schedule these demand side response volumes which are required for these particular conditions. And that is where the stability, you know, with DSR services can provide, you know, this, you know, the system operator, which is not the case when you've got, you know, hardware options, as mentioned here, synchronous condensers or having very large batteries. So the next one is showing that, you know, this is now demonstrated there is a very significant benefits, and that needs to be included in the analysis going forward, because that is, you know, very significant impact. But of course, there are also, you know, what was demonstrated, that the electric vehicles and heat pumps being used for this, you know, that we would need potentially much more, because the value, even if you increase it, doesn't reduce, which means that, you know, there is a significant amount of this required, and that's not regarding the options for 2030. That would be not necessarily sufficient to fully guarantee stability, and that is where other concepts can be included to look at. For example, one of them is obviously a vehicle to grid, because if we potentially can inject power when there is a large loss instantly, that would then provide frequency stability, and that is something which would be potentially very, very useful to be included. And also there is also other loads which potentially could also support that. You know, some of these, you know, for example, you know, refrigeration in supermarkets and so forth can also provide some of these services, and that's something which would be useful to understand in the next phase of what the fast flex scope would be. And as mentioned, you know, kind of the focus is on understanding the benefits of this additional demand, providing these and also these different options of demand side response, what the value of those is. And of course, that would also require enhancements of the market design to make sure that the appropriate revenues are allocated to these different sources, because they may have also different characteristics. So that is, it's, sorry, a little bit perhaps more out of time, but yeah, appreciate any comments or questions would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
So I'm just going to move the slide. Before the GE colleagues start, I'm just going to stop sharing and start again, because I think you can still hear people joining because I'm sharing sound. So bear with me for 1 second. Goran, can I check that you can see my shared screen?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. So yeah, over to the GE colleagues, please.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next slide. So the fast flex concept basically has two key components. One is that we address the disturbances in the network where there's generation or load that's lost, and we make this we apply a locational element, so that it's having recognized the fact that it matters when you try to accelerate the responses for the low inertia power grid. It matters where you apply the response, and so there's a locational element, a sort of detection of there being a disturbance, identifying where to inject a response, and then apply that using a range of flexible devices that are offering the sort of new demand side flexibility, and we want to be able to then coordinate those in a way that delivers a fast and predictable overall response. So two key elements. One is the detection and identification method of where to put the response and how much. And secondly, what are you going to draw on in terms of the demand side flexibility and resources that you have available? And we want to make that as flexible as possible and open to as many players. So at this resourcing perspective, you have a number of different devices which have different capabilities to respond faster or slower, or be sustained, or apply a short-term response but not a long-term. And so if we can merge those different capabilities and make that available to the whole system as an aggregated response, then we move away from the situation where we have to dedicate resources, dedicate the synchronous condensers and batteries to that task, but rather we use what's available and the flexibility that different players can provide to the network. We use that to its greatest effect. That's what we're aiming for in Fast Flex. So next slide. So in essence, there are already a suite of services in place that include everything from a physical inertial response, how the mainly provided by large generators that have a lot of inertia, but of course that's shrinking, and that's the kind of source of our problem. There are frequency response capabilities, both traditional and the newer forms such as dynamic containment, and these are all helping to shift the response faster, but those responses do not yet put a locational element into the frequency service, and that's part of what we're doing. So at the dispatch end, then there's also slower control that demand side flexibility is used in centralized balancing, but that's quite slow. And so what we're aiming to do is sort of put these put this flexibility together with a fast detection and triggering approach, so that we defend the system against the large losses that can come with losses of interconnections or large generators or large loads. So the focus of the problem is this new service applying in the middle between the proportional regulation of frequency and the dispatching to balance the grid in the longer term. This is the new service. And so in our future view, we need to design how to achieve that using the measurement and control approach, which is now now possible. Technology is there to do this. Build it in the algorithms and the mechanisms, both from the technical and the commercial perspective, to then make use of what capabilities are available and could be offered in the network. So next slide, please. So as we look to taking this a stage further, there's an infrastructure that needs to be put in place in order to support the stakeholders to demonstrate and deliver what they're capable of. So so in the lower part of this diagram, you have a measurement infrastructure feeding through. So this is fast measurements. Every cycle, those measurements are brought into an environment where you can run the necessary control algorithms. you then identify the conditions in which you want to draw on the resource, and then you dispatch the response to the participants. So those participants are mainly connected in the distribution network. They're mainly relatively small units, but together you can aggregate it to a substantial response. So as well as that technical path, there is also a system level view of how much response is needed. You know, if you treat the overall response as a block of response available for responding to, for protecting the system against disturbances. So there's a high level transmission system view of that requirement, and then there's a view from the distribution level, firstly of being able to aggregate and distribute those commands to the relevant elements, and then also there's a sort of two-level approach to how that would work commercially. High level is looking at it as a service to the grid, and this the distribution level is looking at how do you incentivize and reward the individual participants who have relatively diverse capability to provide response. Small scale generator, a distribution connected hydro generator will have a slower response. A power electronic connected can be fast. Batteries can play a part in this, and so on. So we need to draw together the capabilities and build the overall high level response. So there are quite a number of stakeholders that would need to participate in an ongoing project that would then bring this to to business as usual. Transmission, there's the infrastructure part, the participants who would offer service, the development of the control infrastructure, and then there's the research and development that goes around this to bring it to a fully business as usual service. So I'll stop here, and happy to take questions when that time comes. These were backup slides, so you don't need to go into those.
Great, thank you, Goran and Dan. So if I can please invite Simon, Rob, and David to present the incentive project, please.
Hey, Manny, thank you for that. Is Simon on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great.
Okay, so I'll introduce Robert, who's going to be doing most of the speaking. So we're going to talk about incentive, which is innovative control and energy storage for ancillary services in offshore wind. Okay, over to you, David. Sorry,
Thanks.
Robert.
No worries. Thanks, Simon. David would be a significant upgrade, I'm sure. So yeah, thanks for that. This is a SSE Networks project. I'm Robert Keys from Carbon Trust, one of the partners in the project, along with National Grid, ESO, and Strathclyde University. Carbon Trust is present in the consortium in its role as the representative of the Offshore Wind Accelerator R&D programme, which is it's a collaborative R&D programme consisting of 9 of the leading global offshore wind developers. So this is a topic of great interest to them, and strong overlap with networks, and so the collaboration between SIF and the Offshore Wind Accelerator is well suited here. This project also builds on a previous Offshore Wind Accelerator project, I should say, which might come up a couple of times in the next few slides. Next slide, please. In fact, maybe jump forward to. Great, thanks. So yeah, the context of this project is all about the decarbonising energy system. As mentioned, this is coming from the offshore wind sector. And whilst obviously it's hugely positive, the news in the offshore wind being an ever-expanding industry, particularly in the UK, there are obviously some challenges that brings, particularly around the balancing and stability issues of the grid. So really the high-level motivation of this project is to maintain and accelerate the pace of decarbonisation, whilst minimising the any negative impact on system stability. In particular, not just decarbonisation, but in particular with offshore wind. So, as mentioned, there was a previous project carried out in the Offshore Wind Accelerator, and that was really investigating how offshore wind farms can go further to support and stabilise the grid using novel technologies. And from that, an innovation challenge or opportunity was identified. In essence, the outcome of that project identified that technical, market, regulatory and commercial innovation is required in order to bring these technologies to market. There's a link there if anyone's interested. It's a publication on the Carbon Trust website from the previous predecessing project. Yes, next slide. You might want to just click through to populate this. I didn't realise I wasn't going to be in control. Excellent. So this is just highlighting the discovery phase structure. So 3 work packages. First one was around the commercial side. So looking at the cost benefits of these various technologies, comparing them to business as usual and comparing them to each other. There's also a regulatory overview, which is looking at ownership models of these various technologies. And then there was the technology review, which was essentially looking at how we can, what steps we need to do to de-risk these technologies to bring them to market and build the confidence in them commercially. Towards the end of the discovery phase, we then brought all the 3 work packages together to kind of give some overall conclusions and to scope the next phase, the alpha phase. Next slide, please. So the first stage was to generate a long list of potential technologies. So these were really kind of every kind of technology that could be used to, in conjunction with an offshore wind farm, to stabilise the networks. And in particular, we were looking at inertial stability. I should stress that. And what we did with this long list was then to kind of qualitatively produce a shorter list, so to kind of rule some of these out that were potentially of less interest for the sake of this project. They might be very interesting in other contexts, but as kind of mentioned, this technology is all about quite focusing on the relative short to medium term in terms of allowing offshore wind farms to provide additional services to the grid. So the first way we ruled reduced the long list to short list was to rule out solutions that were not compatible with net zero networks. We also wanted to ensure that any technologies were readily co-locatable at offshore wind farms at the margins of the GB network and also across the GB network. So that ruled out things like pumped hydro, for instance. Also, we wanted to make sure that the maturity of the technology was suitably mature to be assessed and demonstrated as part of this project. As mentioned, this was all about being quite tangible in terms of what technologies we want to bring to the market. So those 3 criteria kind of ruled out 5 of the 10 options here. So I'm going to click through. Yes, combined gas turbines went, pumped hydro went, demand side options went, as did hydrogen and hydrogen turbines and flow batteries, all deemed not to meet one of those criteria. If you click through to the next slide, you'll see that that left us with the shortlist for assessment and discovery. Yeah, maybe just talk to those briefly. There's battery energy storage with grid forming to be located at the onshore substation. There's STATCOM with supercapacitor plus grid forming capabilities to be again located at the onshore substation. There's HVDC terminal with grid forming capabilities to replace a traditional HVDC terminal for an HVDC connected wind farm. There's wind turbine with grid forming technology to replace existing wind turbines offshore, and also a synchronous condenser to be located at the onshore substation. So these are the 5 technologies that we really focused on in discovery and continued with the analysis. If we're going to go to the next slide, I'll just talk you through what the conclusions were from the 3 work packages. So as mentioned, the first work package was the CBA, looking at the commercial models or the commercial case for these various technologies. And what we did was take a consumer perspective for these the various 5 technologies, and really kind of considered the cost and benefits on an energy system level as a whole. Each technology was assessed at a nominal 50 megawatt size, and that was selected for convenience and comparison purposes. And the timescale for the assets to be assessed over was taken as 25 years. So just looking through some of the high-level outcomes, you can see that each of the 4 technologies mentioned here all have positive CBA in the central case, but with some elements of uncertainty or sensitivity. In particular, the largest area of uncertainty you can see is in the grid forming battery energy storage unit. That uncertainty is driven by the significantly larger capex involved with battery energy storage compared to the other 3 options, which in turn drove additional uncertainty. You can see in terms of the greatest net present value for any of the 4 shown here is the HVDC terminal with grid forming capabilities. Yeah, I should just say as well that you'll notice there's only 4 technologies listed here, and the wind grid forming wind turbine that was mentioned on the previous slide was not taken into the CBA in detail due to a lack of data available in the time scale of discovery. So in terms of areas of further work, we will try to gain more data on some of the on the grid forming wind turbine, but also drill into in much more detail the 4 options presented here. So we need to consider in particular how regulation and ownership options can impact CBA for the various technologies. So making sure that, at the moment we've looked at this from a system level, but what we really want to make sure in order to commercialize these technologies is that there's a value stream for each user in the user stream. And there's also additional sensitivities to consider, particularly around the cost for various sizing, and also around the levels of stability services that each of these technologies can provide. We're also looking for input from project partners in Alpha on better understanding of future stability markets. At the moment, all these calculations were carried out on the basis of existing markets. We're also quite interested in looking at non-carbon environmental positives and negatives of these various technologies, which was touched upon in discovery, but needs significant further work. Next slide, please, and this might need to be clicked through a few times to bring everything up. Sorry about that. So this looks at this is work package 2 outcomes, which was the ownership analysis. So looking at how these various technologies are impacted by regulation, or the ownership of those technologies are impacted by regulation. And very broadly, this slide shows the ownership being broken down into 2 possibilities. The top row shows regulated network company ownership as an option, so that could be transmission owner or off-tow. And the bottom shows offshore wind farm ownership, which also could largely be read on to mean any third private party. So you can see if we look at regulated network company ownership, that battery energy storage with grid forming at the location of offshore wind farm connections, so the onshore substation, produces some relatively significant regulatory barriers in terms of the ownership of the storage asset. Similarly, with the STATCOM with supercapacitors, there are some regulatory complexities there, although potentially less so than battery energy storage. And I think we need some clarity as to how those assets could be defined for regulated network company ownership. For synchronous condenser and HVDC terminal, the view from discovery is that they're quite low operational and regulatory complexity to be owned by a network company. In terms of wind turbine, that's obviously not feasible to be owned, not be owned by the offshore wind farm owner. Yeah, we drop down to the offshore wind farm owner in terms of ownership options. Again, the battery energy storage does produce some operational and regulatory complexity in terms of the operation that's to do with the interoperability of the battery energy storage system at the point of at the onshore substation. In terms of the SATCOM, there is still some lingering uncertainty into how the operational and ownership model will work if owned by a independent third party like a offshore wind farm owner, but less so than the battery energy storage unit. Again, for synchronous condensers, it seemed to be quite low operational complexity. An HVDC terminal is not envisaged to be owned by an offshore wind farm, and obviously for a wind turbine, that produces very low regulatory ownership issues. So I guess in terms of high-level conclusions, there are viable ownership models identified in Discovery for all of the technologies being considered, which is positive, but we just need to drill into these all in more detail in Alpha. So there's a lot of further work we need to do. In particular, I think one of the key things is to clarify storage asset classification in terms of that split between third-party private ownership and regulated company network company ownership. There's also quite a lot of moving parts outside of this project, such as the OTNR Offshore Transmission Network Review, which we're waiting for the results from, and that will greatly inform how this will change, how the outcome of the ownership analysis will change in Alpha. Next slide, please. And again, maybe just click through a few. Thank you. So yeah, key part of work package 3, which is the final work package to talk through. This is all about the testing requirements. So looking at those technologies, particularly the more novel ones, and really what we really want to do with the testing regime that's been developed is to increase the understanding of the performance of those technologies, and also the system effects and how they might impact the system. And what we really want to get to is commercial confidence. That's the real key aim of the incentives project in Discovery Alpha and Beta in the future. So yes, the 5-step in very high level. There's a report that goes into a lot more detail here, but very high level. Start off with the generic simulation using generic models of incentive technologies, so the technologies that have been presented earlier. Then we'd look to model those at specific sites. And in the third step, we'd look at obtaining technology-specific models, so from the suppliers of the technologies themselves. And then the fourth step would be to conduct control hardware in the loop, so gaining control hardware in the laboratory environment, and then going for a full hardware test, which may be in the field or again in a laboratory type setting. So I should say that these testing requirements were developed with strong engagement from the supply chain, from suppliers of the technologies that have been listed above. So thank you very much if you're on the line and provided those. In terms of further work, we're obviously going to go try and in Alpha and Beta go through this testing regime, and supplier input will be important, particularly for those last 3 stages. So we have already we've been speaking, as mentioned, with a number of suppliers, and the input's been very strong. So thanks for that. But we will continue to seek to build those relationships throughout the rest of the project. Next slide, please, which is the final one. You'll be pleased to hear. So this is just looking at Alpha and what we have planned next. So yeah, breaking it down basically into 3 very broad work streams. The first is the commercial assessment, and what really that's going to be doing is bringing together the CBA work and the ownership model work that I discussed earlier from Discovery. At the moment, due to timescales, they were done relatively independently from one another. But what we really want to do in order to commercially assess these technologies properly and thoroughly is to bring those together. So look at a CBA given a specific workable ownership model, for instance. The second work stream is to go through the technology testing, so the testing regime that I just outlined. How far we get through that in Alpha remains to be seen, obviously, but we will see where we get to, and the remaining steps can be carried on in Beta. And on that note, the third main work stream is to conduct scoping activities for Beta. Obviously, any kind of beta demonstration will take some significant effort and time to set up. And I think what we want to do is have that running as a dedicated work stream in parallel with the commercial assessment and the technology testing to make sure that come Christmas time, although I hate talking about Christmas already, that we will have enough time to really kind of consolidate everything that we've done in Discovery and Alpha so far and come up with a suitable beta scope that's achievable and also impactful. So thank you for that. I think that concludes the Discovery overview for incentive. And yeah, I guess we'll move on to questions. Thanks, Marion.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Simon. I think we can move on to the Q&A session. If we can please ask Goran and Douglas to come on video as well. So I can kind of put some of the audience questions to you. So we have 10 minutes. Let's see how much we can get through. So maybe if I start with the Fast Flex project, I think there's quite a simple clarification question, perhaps, that is there an alpha stage plan for the Fast Flex project?
Right, will I take that? So there is ongoing work from it, and the Synergy project is also is a part of the progression of this phase. At the moment, there's not going to be there's not an immediate alpha phase progression, but what we're looking into is whether that alpha phase can happen not immediately, but in relatively short-term future.
Got it. Thank you, Douglas. Another question on FastFlex again. Does the communication infrastructure exist for the low latency distributed measurements required, or is this an area which may need to be developed specifically?
The capabilities are there, and we have established wide area communications and measurements and proven that in a number of projects up till now, and so that there is the technology and standardization available off the shelf. What I would say is that to expand out the infrastructure will require some additions to what's already on the network. It can't be done just fully formed from what is available now in the network. There will be some infrastructure work. So yes, the technology is available. Yes, it has been proven on the network. There would be expansions to it, though.
Thanks, Douglas. The next question is to you as well. Is there data on current regional phase differences? Can you briefly say how this could be measured? If it implied from small local frequency changes, is there data on this?
Manu, I don't know if you can put up slide 6 in the GE slides, just as an example. But while you're looking for that, there's been the technology of synchrophasor measurement basically takes snapshots at every cycle of the power system, time aligns those, and brings those to the control or measurement a kind of the place where the decisions are made. So there is quite detailed information from synchrophasor measurements around the network throughout the GB network, and it's also used internationally a lot. And so we have really some quite good information on how spread the frequency is, and how the phase angles will move for disturbances. And actually that data was quite critical for the blackout in August 2019, where the differences in frequency and its gradient actually played a part in the fact that there was a cluster of the network which which went down in that disturbance. So yes, there's quite good information now on how the system responds in disturbances, and internationally we can draw on experience in countries like Australia and Iceland, where some of those differences have had effects of separating and causing blackouts in different parts of the grid.
Thank you, Douglas. I think there's a few more questions for you, but I'll go to Rob and then I'll come back to you if you have time. Rob, again, perhaps a clarification question. If the wind turbine has inertia with grid forming, is there an energy penalty? And is that a barrier that's kind of led to you downgrading that option?
So the answer to that is yes. I think with all the options, the energy used in the inertia service needs to come from somewhere, in essence. I should caveat that by saying that we haven't studied the wind turbine in huge amounts of detail in the discovery phase. We may look at that in more detail in the alpha phase, although it's my kind of personal view that that's just from experience with the wind industry that topic itself might need a whole dedicated project. But in essence, yeah, all the technologies that we're looking at need to gain energy from somewhere to give it out at another time. And I think, you know, depending on the technologies we're looking at, some of them are quite different in terms of how much energy they need to store or borrow from somewhere else in the system for that period of time that we're most interested in, which is the kind of very short timescale inertia response. Yeah, hopefully that covers it.
So just to clarify, did you say you have not considered the energy penalty in your assessment thus far across all technology?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of, yeah, it's not going to be a huge energy penalty in terms of you know, in terms of quantity. I think the more interesting thing is how the controllability of the various assets will work and how you can prioritize one over the other, which we haven't looked at yet, given it's a 6-7 week project. But yeah, obviously we'll have to look into all that in alpha and beta. And you know, there are, as mentioned, a number of quite big questions that need to be addressed in alpha in terms of the you know, as I mentioned, we're really focusing on answering all these kind of commercial questions that are preventing these technologies currently going to market. So kind of, you know, getting to the bottom of all these points is really important.
Cheers, Rob. One more specific question to you, and then there's, I think, one cross-cutting that we could to get your and Douglas's view. So, what drives the CBA uncertainty? It looks like, for example, like BESS has a very big range of uncertainty. Is that the uncertainty that you're showing in your CBA graph?
So the main driver for, well, the reason why battery energy storage is larger is just around uncertainty in the capex. So we know what the kind of cost at the moment, but you know, it's potential for that capex to come down quite a lot. Also, there's a bit of uncertainty as to how often or how much it would cost to kind of repower the battery energy system unit over the 25-year period. I think it was a kind of I think it was 10-year kind of battery duration before a repower was necessary. Although again, I should caveat that by saying I did not do the CBA work. But yeah, essentially the large capex and the uncertainty on that large capex meant that the uncertainty became larger. But these are all things we need to focus on in alpha for sure.
Perfect. So we have 1 minute. Maybe if we can pick up like a top 2 points here, like what are the biggest barriers towards business as usual deployment? Rob, if you want to go first and pick your top 2, and Douglas, if you can do top 2 as well.
Well, to cop out, I mean, I think that the 2 work streams that we've developed in alpha are really key. So I mean, we've identified that, you know, there's basically quite large uncertainties around the commercial models for these technologies, and then there's also uncertainties around the technical performance. So yeah, those 2, but they're obviously huge topics, but we'll focus on them in alpha.
Could I maybe mention some of the questions?
Goran, we're running out of time to jump to the next presentation, so maybe happy to pick that up separately.
Okay, there are some questions. I just thought maybe quickly to respond.
Yeah, we'll make sure we'll get the answers from you, and I'll make sure it kind of reaches the people. Or if you want to type in the chat box, I'm happy to.
I can maybe just it's half a minute just to mention this regarding some of these heat pumps and EVs providing this. There is already in place measurements, which is local measurements and the demand side of frequency, which can be used for this for heat pumps and EVs to actually respond. There was already some of the activities and projects when there was refrigeration, for example, measurements, and then you would have these refrigerators kind of being switched off for a little bit, or time, but the frequency measurements and rate of change of frequency is done in a local level. So that information will be available, and at the local that would enable distribution resources to respond in time. Thank you.
Thanks, Goran. And thanks to Rob, thanks Douglas for your presentations. Really appreciate taking the time to answering the questions as well. So I think let's move on to the next project, CrowdFlex. Can I please invite Nina? Would you be starting off the presentation?
Manu, can you re-share your slides, please?
Sure.
Thanks. Hi, everyone.
This coming up okay?
Great. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, let's go for the next slide, if that's all right, Manu. Thanks. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. Hi, we're here to talk about CrowdFlex. My name's Nina, I work at National Grid ESO, and I'll be presenting the project alongside Freddie from Element Energy and Kieran from Octopus Energy. But we've got other partners on the consortium, including OMI for EV charge points and 2 DNOs, WPD and SSEN. Great, next slide, please. So as I'm sure all of you are well aware from listening to the presentations today, the energy transition is well underway. And of course, that brings with it certain challenges, but also opportunities. And so from a CrowdFlex point of view, what we're aiming to address is that on the supply side of the energy system, we're seeing much more renewable generation like wind and solar. And this is low carbon, which is great, but also it's non-dispatchable, which can present a challenge. On the demand side as well, we're seeing more electric vehicles and heat pumps, which are increasing the electricity demand. And so in order to operate this decarbonised electricity system, we need the demand side of the system to be much more smart and flexible and also reliable. Therefore, there's a huge opportunity for consumers to offer domestic flexibility to the system. So this could enable more renewable generation to be used on the supply side, and it could also help reduce the peak demand on the network on the demand side. However, currently, domestic flexibility is largely untapped, as we don't fully understand how to incentivise delivery from consumers, and there are also barriers in the existing market structures. So this is where CrowdFlex comes in. It's here to explore novel services reflecting the statistical and distributed nature of domestic assets, and we really hope that its findings can help to lower the cost and lower the carbon of system operation, and also help to minimise future investment costs in both capacity and network. So overall, CrowdFlex aims to establish domestic flexibility as a reliable energy and grid management resource. Next slide. So I'll give a quick overview of the CrowdFlex project now. So there are 3 main objectives. The first one is to understand and align the ESO and DNO requirements for flexibility services, and to consider how they can interact with the statistical nature of these domestic flexibility assets. That's stream 1. Stream 2 is all about a real-world trial. And what we'll be doing here is identifying the technology capabilities and also the consumer behaviour parameters that we can explore together in a real-world trial. The third stream is all about modelling. And here we really want to understand how the statistical nature of flexibility can be developed into a reliable modelling of domestic demand and domestic flexibility. So those 3 objectives we're going to be developing through 3 different phases of work subject to future SIF funding. So we've now completed the discovery phase to kind of assess the feasibility of these ideas, and it looks like we're on to good and useful work here. So what we've proposed is for Alpha to then do further work designing that future trial and designing that future model. And then finally in Beta, if we get the funding, then we would actually undertake that trial and develop and deliver that model. And so overall, to give a sense of scope for CrowdFlex, the kind of technologies that we're working with are all domestic assets. We're looking at automatic as well as manual operation, and we'll be looking specifically at EVs, heat pumps, and also kind of general flexible white goods. Of course, we'll be using smart metering to gather data and understand responses. And we'll also be looking at kind of consumer segmentation analysis and different statistical modelling approaches. This next slide. So the approach that we've taken to delivering the project in Discovery was broadly around undertaking lots of interviews with subject matter experts and also doing some desk-based concept development work and also some data analysis. So first of all, we interviewed various experts at the ESO and the two DNOs to understand really clearly what their user needs were for procuring flexibility services. So we discussed with them kind of the system challenges they're facing and also the current flexibility services they're using, as well as kind of assessing their appetite for whether domestic flexibility could play a role in those services and what kind of key uncertainties they still had that we could then address in a future trial. The next phase then was to kind of consider the consumer needs, and here was where we undertook some segmentation analysis and also research what kind of engagement approaches were going to be needed for a trial. And we also had some really good discussions with citizens' advice to gather some of the latest kind of insights as to how to engage consumers well in the smart energy system. Finally, we also conducted a number of interviews to really understand better what the aggregator might need to model in order to offer these distributed and statistical flexibility services. So we interviewed some forecasting experts to understand what kind of the latest current statistical approaches to forecasting are of generation and demand assets on the system. And finally, of course, we did engage with a number of other innovation projects in this space to make sure we were sharing learning with them and aligning our future plans together. And we also met with BEIS and Ofgem to discuss any of the kind of policy implications of proposing some of these new services. So for the rest of this presentation, we'll discuss some of the key findings and results that we learned in Discovery, and I'll hand over to Freddie first to discuss the results. Thanks, Freddie.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks. So first of all, in Discovery, we sort of returned to first principles to try and understand what the current and future challenges and needs that the ESO and the DSOs are facing and how they could draw on domestic flexibility to solve them. At the moment, and as I'm sure you're all aware, these challenges are addressed and met through the various energy markets and then the flexibility services that the ESO and DSOs offer. Firstly, and very importantly, Discovery confirmed that there is a strong appetite within the ESO and DSOs for flexibility to play an active role in these flexibility services. And Discovery sort of only flagged that it was only the most rapid response services as the new dynamic containment services that are potentially beyond the technical capabilities of domestic assets at a sensible cost. For the other services and energy markets, we identified that they can be split into two distinct categories. The first is these PAS routine type flexibility, which aligns closely with balancing via energy markets. This is where flexibility can be declared close to the time of delivery and can be pre-planned but variable throughout the year. The other type is the PAS response type flexibility, and this aligns with sort of these two different flavors. One of them is system critical services, and that's stuff like the capacity market. And then the other side is operational services such as your response and your reserve services, where availability is agreed and guaranteed ahead of time, and the delivery of the service is critical to the system operation. If we go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Discovery then went on to lay out the parameters and dimensions that would be required for a successful large-scale trial of domestic flexibility based on these two categories of flexibility services. For PAS routine type flexibility services, a trial must produce a time-wise vector of baseline demand that's overlaid by the expected flexibility capacity for each time interval throughout the year. And that's so that because flexibility will vary throughout the day and then seasonally, and we need to understand those impacts on what we can provide. Then we have the two PAS response type flexibility services, and these have subtly different requirements. For the system operational events like response and reserve services, it's required we need a measurement of firm capacity, but that firm capacity can vary throughout the year as it enters into different sections of those services, and so we need to understand how the firm capacity might vary under different conditions. The second is the system stress event, And this needs to be conducted specifically during those stress events to understand how domestic flexibility might be able to respond when they're called upon in a real world situation. An example of this is understanding how domestic flexibility could be able to enter the capacity market and then provide the service during a cold weather peak. I think now we'll move on to the understanding the modelling of flexibility. And for that, I believe I'll hand over to Kieran.
Thanks, Freddie. Hi, everyone. Kieran from Octopus Energy here. So in addition to understanding kind of the physical operation of domestic flexibility assets in existing and future grid services, what is also required is kind of a complete evolution in the way that people understand domestic flexibility as an asset. And one of the critical tasks for the project was really to build out that understanding around, you know, what really is domestic flexibility and how, you know, how do you model it and how do you forecast it? So as we've covered already, domestic flexibility is a very different type of asset to others. You know, traditional generating assets are point sources, they're highly controllable, they're very predictable. But for domestic flexibility, typically distributed, heterogeneous type of asset, there's variability, and it tends to be incentive-led or low-level kind of automation-led instead of you know, a big power station that you can tell to do whatever you want, and it pretty much does that. So what that means is it's a much more probabilistic type of resource. Like you have a distribution of different probabilities associated with all of these different outcomes. And that means that we have to do more work as flexibility providers, you know, and probably on the national grid side to understand, you know, at any given moment in the day, on any given moment of the year, you know, how much flexibility are you going to get and how certain can you be that it will show up? So what this means is looking along the piece, you need an evolution in the skill sets and capability really to drive this to greater adoption. So that includes things like better forecasting of demand and flexibility, figuring out what your forecast error is, figuring out how to settle that, you know, and then understanding from a grid operations point of view how to ingest all of that information. So in Discovery, we looked at a high-level process for forecasting flexibility. Basically, the way we approached this was you can understand flexibility in terms of, firstly, what underlying demand is going to do. So, you know, for a given household or group of households, you know, what is your baseline level of demand going to do on any given day, any given period? Then at any given time, you have an amount of flexibility potential up and down, which might be driven by the underlying demand. It might be driven by low carbon technologies. You know, if there's an EV charging or an EV that has potential to charge, you kind of have up for any given half-hour settlement period, you sort of have an up and a down potential. Now, the third step is translating that into an expected outturn. So if you were to send an instruction to that, you know, of the total up and down potential, how much would actually be delivered, you know, subsequent to any. So, you know, if you're using time of use tariffs, or if you're sending instructions to people to switch on and off kind of washing machines or appliances or whatever, you know, how many people are going to participate and how much of that demand really is shiftable. In addition to this, we looked at a couple of use cases for enhanced modeling. So firstly is improving demand side visibility. Basically, the better that you can forecast demand, you know, the less sort of reserve you need to have in place for kind of those unknown events. And there's a diagram on the right-hand side which sort of illustrates this. So if your demand forecast is low accuracy, then your distribution of possible outcomes is very wide. So you need to be able to plan for you know, much wider range of eventualities, and that means that you need to have more reserves in place, ready to go, and you need to, you know, kind of expend more money in having it there. If you have a high accuracy on your demand forecast, then your range of possible outcomes is much narrower. So there's an opportunity to kind of rationalize reserve requirements there. The other use case that we looked at was forecasting availability for flexibility services. So this is how, you know, if you deploy an amount of domestic flexibility, even if it is variable, or even if there is an error in that forecast, like there is still potential to reduce operating costs, and and that can help kind of reduce overall capacities and reinforcement spending on the network. Now, obviously, this is kind of in territory that it's sort of perfect territory for a digital twin, looking at domestic demand and flexibility. And that's another area that we initially started to scope out through discovery. So looking forward to Alpha, our plan is to, if we're successful, is to kind of enhance the forecasting techniques, get to another level of detail on this, and provide a detailed scope for what digital twin efforts may look like. Back to you, Freddie.
Thanks, Kieran. So if we can move to the next slide, please.
Freddie, if you can finish up on the next minute, please. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So this sort of final part is just looking at the sort of stochastic delivery of flexibility services. At the moment, they're procured through a declared firm capacity. However, domestic flexibility, as Kieran said, is inherently stochastic, which means that you have to derate your capacity in order to provide flexibility with a certain probability, and that's sort of what we're describing in this graph on the right. It leads to the fact that the ESO or whoever's procuring this flexibility needs to over procure flexibility because they're derating every single set of portfolios. However, if you could provide flexibility, if you could describe it stochastically via a probability density function, then you could balance the under delivery from one portfolio with over deliveries from other, or increased visibility from other possible system changes. This is another area that we're hoping to look into in Alpha, because by doing this, you would be able to eliminate the need to derate capacity. You would be able to reduce over procurement, and through that, you could provide system savings for all stakeholders, including the consumer, the ESO, and the suppliers and aggregators who are pooling this portfolio of domestic flexibility. Thanks, Manny. We can finish there.
Thanks, Freddie. Skip to the slide. Yeah.
Yeah. If there's time, then we can. Well, I'll happily talk to this. It was only yeah. It seemed like we were running out of time, so that's fine. We can end there if needs.
Okay. Thank you. We can pick up with something in the Q&A session if you want to finish off stuff. Let's pick it up there. Thank you so much. So let's move on to the next presentation. So this is CEV from Laura and Keith from NGN, and I should just say that this is a project that figured under the data and digitalization challenge, but they've taken a whole systems approach to addressing this, and therefore they're kind of figuring in the whole systems integration challenge, which I think is great and kind of very progressive. And this is something that we push for in the next round of challenges, to make whole systems and data and digitalization a continuous thread across all of the challenges. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to Laura.
It's me. So hi, it's Jess. I'm Jess Cook from. No, it's fine. I'm Jess Cook from NEA, and thank you very much, everybody, for listening to our dissemination of what happened during discovery for a very long titled CEV Critical Factors for the Adoption of Smart Homes for Energy Efficiency and Implications for Consumers and Providers. I'm joined by my colleagues Danielle Butler from NEA and Diana Gregory-Smith from Newcastle University, who will be taking us through the presentation. And we're also joined by our colleagues Laura Robson and Keith Owen from Northern Gas Networks, who will be here for questions and answers. Thank you, Manny, for just confirming that, yes, this was actually submitted as a data and digitalisation project. We still feel it's very aligned to those aims for that competition, primarily that we're delivering the next generation of user-driven digital products, services and processes, and also that it's about improving the data monitoring, availability, quality, collection, interoperability, access and insights of all of that to third parties to increase consumer choice. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Danielle to start us off. So next slide, please.
I believe that's the introduction slide that Jess has just spoken to, so could we actually just go to the next slide, please? Okay, thanks, Jess. So firstly, I'm just going to highlight why it's critical that such streams of work have a focus and a commitment to better understand the user experience. In this case, in understanding why or why not people adopt smart home systems and technologies. So to give a bit of a context to this research, the UK needs to decarbonise 20,000 homes per week for the next 25 years, and currently we are decarbonising around 20,000 per year. So at the heart of this is an importance of both energy and water efficiency, and smart systems and technologies help us to achieve this in the home. We know this from a substantial evidence base across academic and industry and policy specialist research that even small changes can result in significant aggregate impact on overall energy use. But large-scale implementation requires support for changes in household systems, decision-making and energy-related behaviours. Certain groups of consumers, as was the focus of much of our review, however, do not have the capacity or opportunity to engage, and efforts to better understand how to overcome exclusion of some of the most vulnerable consumers is critical, and this was a key element of our project. Next slide, please. Lovely, thank you. So the project itself is split across 6 key outputs, and these will be discussed as we move through the slides. This included 2 extensive reviews of academic and industry and policy specialist publications and resources, and these were brought together by the multidisciplinary and cross-sectoral team represented here. Brought together into a report, output 3, detailing the main findings across the combined reviews, and developed further into a good practice framework that Diana will discuss in more detail in a second. We presented this framework to key stakeholders from academia, industry, government and other sectors at a webinar in April, and these outputs are all available as an online resource. So now I'll hand over to Diana to talk about the methodology and the framework produced in more detail. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Danielle. So on this slide, what you see is a timeline of our methodology, basically made up of 4 steps. Initially, we planned the review. So again, a reminder that review has been undertaken by Newcastle University, myself and a couple of colleagues, and NEA, National Energy Action, Danielle, Jess and other colleagues. So we met up and we discussed a few important things right from the beginning, and also we kept in touch throughout the entire process and delivery of outcomes. But first of all, we met up and we defined the research questions. So we're very much interested in finding out which are these key factors that influence technology, smart technology adoption among consumers, users of all kinds, including those that are low income and vulnerable. And we are also interested in finding out specifically which are the barriers, which are those challenges that stop this adoption by all typologies of users. At step 2, we conducted the reviews, and as Danielle said, was a joint effort. I'll talk about that on the next slide. At step 3, we synthesized the reviews into a framework, and again, I'll provide more details later. And at step 4, we prepared a report that included the framework, the emerging themes, and also a series of recommendations. Next slide, please. So in terms of the review that we have conducted, what you can see here is a summary of the evidence review. There was an academic review carried out by Newcastle University and an industry policy-based review conducted by NEA. In terms of the broad initial approach that we took, the Newcastle University started by using a very well-known comprehensive database called Scopus, and our initial search led us to uncover about 16,000 sources that could have potentially been useful for the review that we were about to embark on. On the other hand, NEA has put out a call for evidence and has carried out stakeholder consultation. So they have used multiple outputs and resources and a broader search strategy. However, despite these differences, again, the teams have talked regularly, and what we have used right from the beginning is the search keyword term of smart home as the umbrella term. But we have also agreed and discussed more specific terms for our literature, such as smart technology, adoption, and here we looked at enablers and barriers, water, energy, heating, energy conservation, and again, keywords on the vulnerability, low income, to capture those kind of demographics. We have also agreed in terms of the inclusion criteria as being those outputs published in English since 2012, largely covering the UK, and they, more importantly, they had to be peer reviewed for the academic side, and they had to be industry and policy specialist resources. So we have started with thousands of resources. We have filtered those to about 3,000 that had more potential to inform our literature review. And after several steps and iterations in terms of identifying the most useful ones, we ended up with 139 resources. 69 of these were on the industry policy side, and 70 of them were academic peer-reviewed outputs. Thank you. Next slide. So after this extensive work of identifying the most relevant resources and consulting and reviewing those in depth, what we ended up is with a list of factors which we have ranked and then grouped into these 6 categories: smart home systems, costs and benefits, environmental, user, support networks and communities, policy, industry and regulation. So next slide, please. These factors, as you can see here, hopefully, are these categories of factors are the ones that we have used to jointly, all the partners involved in this project, develop a framework that synthesizes and maps the main factors, categories of factors, and the different relationships between them. So in the yellow boxes, what you can see are the 5 main categories of factors that are the pillars of this framework, are explaining which are the drivers, the main factors influencing adoption. And as an overarching factor at the bottom, we have the policy, industry, and regulation category. But also we have tried to map, based on the information from the reviews, the different relationships between these categories. So you might see different arrows, and sometimes we're talking about dual bilateral sort of relationships between these categories of factors. Also later on I can take questions about the framework should you have, or should you like any more insights about it. Thank you very much. I'll pass on to my colleague Danielle to continue with another output.
Danielle, you're on mute.
Thanks, Jess. Save everyone listening to my coughing in between slides. So thanks, Diana. From this framework and part of our vision for the practical impact and application of the framework, we've used this to develop a resource that introduces a mapping tool or a mapping framework which can be adapted to different users and audiences. So the example displayed here, which we don't expect you to read the small detail, has been lifted directly from our report, and the more specific detail on that can be found in there, which is on this slide here. So this particular example focuses on the user or the householder perspective and includes a set of questions. And these questions, such as can everyone in my house use this easily, are simple indicators or prompts as part of the tool, which are mapped against the 6 key adoption factors, which Diana was talking about. In yellow, they can be found on the left-hand side. And what we've done is situate these across 5 recognised stages of adoption found within the literature, which includes awareness, persuasion, decision, implementation and continuation, to help us structure and direct action and activity against the adoption of smart home systems and technology. So in Alpha, it's our vision to develop multiple mapping frameworks for different users and audiences, such as this one, that can be made available in different formats and tailored to those specific users and audiences. This could, for example, include an accessible web-based tool targeted at supporting social housing providers to support their own residents in the uptake of smart home systems and tech, which was a key user group and area within the literature that we covered. Next slide, please. And in addition, our report sets out 13 recommendations that are targeted towards a wide range of relevant actors identified within the review, so including those in industry and policy specialist roles, but also within academia, government and beyond. Several of these recommendations are included in this slide, and these are broadly situated around flexibility, protection, design and development, as well as ways of working effectively and securely with data, households and stakeholders, such as the health sector or housing providers. 2 worth mentioning here that draw out the importance of a focus on the user perspective perspective include a need to ensure that we give customers or consumers adequate information on both financial and non-financial benefits of smart technologies, and that we encourage and support the principle of inclusion by design. There's also a recognised and significant gap in understanding how best to support the adoption of smart home systems while ensuring an increase in confidence in data security. So highlighting the importance of and calling for action against a number of these recommendations is a priority of ours, and has highlighted the strength in existing networks and illustrated where there may be a role for certain actions, actors or sectors, for example, with regards to training that could be examined further. And this is also an element that shaped our Alpha submission. I'll now hand back to Jess to focus a little bit more on what's next. Thank you.
Thanks to both. So thinking about what comes next then, we have submitted next stage on an Alpha application. I did comment at the very beginning of this how long the title of our initial discovery project was. So this is actually under a new title of Smart Homes for a Smarter Energy Future. I'd like just to explain a little bit about how we can see the progression of this project. So initially with Alpha, we'd like to take the framework that Diana and Danielle have just taken us through there. We'd like to test that now with stakeholders and users. Primarily, we want to understand if our assumptions that we've made are correct. We believe that all of those factors, that were 6 factors and 29 sub-factors, each can be considered an either enabling or a barrier to an adoption decision, dependent on the person and the circumstances they find themselves in. So we want to explore that a little bit further. We want to understand if actually any of the literature that was reviewed was maybe missing something, and that there's some things that we haven't yet considered. And we want to ensure that we do that in a thorough way. So extensive engagement programme in order to do that, and then for us to be able to refine our framework that forms the basis of Work Package 1. Work Package 2 then is, as Danielle just alluded to, about developing a tool to make that framework more usable. So we've just touched very lightly there upon the questions from the householder perspective, but we believe that this can be developed into probably a web-based tool, a decision support tool that would help certain stakeholder groups to make decisions for their projects or products that they may be developing, or even services, to try and understand how these factors impact on decisions. So we have identified 3 stakeholder groups that we would do this for during Alpha. That's energy networks, social housing providers, and also the installers of smart home technologies, because for however good a product is, if the installation process isn't right, then that can actually be set to fail. So that forms Work Package 2. Work Package 3 acknowledges that through all of this engagement, we may actually come across potential other solutions that aren't yet on the market and could potentially be developed. It could be technology based, it could be service based. We just want to see how we're led through this meaningful engagement and what potentially comes out of that. So recognising this, we'd like to work with users and with stakeholders to identify some of those solutions through extensive idea generation, and then develop those into what we call our solution concept development. That means that we can potentially identify things that could be taken forward to a beta stage submission, where we can start prototyping our ideas and working with users and stakeholders through the concept of co-design and the principles of meaningful engagement. We want to see other projects being involved with this as well. So alongside all of this, we have an NIA funded project on the Customer Energy Village through Northern Gas Networks, where this gives us a unique opportunity to test some of these ideas through extensive customer engagement and actually getting them to see products that have utilised the framework and the insight and learning from that. Can we go to the next slide, please? That's everything. If you just go to the next slide, please, that'll be our contact details will be on that one as well, if anybody would like to get involved at any point in any stage of the next project. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks everybody else on the presentation team. If I could please invite back Nina, Kieran and Freddie, we can go to the Q&A for these 2 project presentations. We're running a little late, but we'll see how much we can squeeze in, and we might have to eat into the 10-minute break a little bit. So apologies in advance. So perhaps I'll start off with some questions for the CrowdFlex project, if that's okay. So have you factored in consumer behavior and possibly irrational mistrust of the system having control over their devices? It's a good question to start off.
Yeah, happy to take that one. I don't know if you had any. I know there's another one for Kieran, so but welcome to chip in on this. So I think one of the things that's very good is Crowdflex is building on some other trials that have happened previously. So there was an NIA funded version of Crowdflex, which had kind of a big turn up event and a big turn down event, and also switched some people to time of use tariffs. And from having done that kind of initial, very small trial, with just a couple of events, but very large numbers of consumers, we've been able to see that there is a good response for consumers. And I think that's kind of a good piece of proof of concept work in terms of consumer engagement and consumer behaviour that gives us confidence that there will be engagement. However, of course, there will be some people that have more concerns around safety and security and cybersecurity risk and so on. And so we've got a specific work package going forward in our alpha proposal that very specifically targets consumer engagement and what you need to do to ensure that you're equipping them with the education of the different aspects that they would need and answering their questions and making sure they do feel equipped and confident to participate. So I think we definitely agree it's important. We've built it into our plans, and hopefully we've got enough proof of concept that it won't be kind of a critical barrier, even if there might be some people that are harder to convince than others. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, this is partly Crowdflex specific, partly broader Octopus work, but I think it's just a question of being really clear with customers what the relationship is, and being really clear on the terms and conditions, taking time to explain to customers what the trial or what the tariff is, and I think to the extent that we are optimizing and controlling individual devices, that's always puts the customer's kind of preferences and priorities first. And I think with that kind of understanding, together with the right sort of tariff level, that seems to be something that customers can get on board with. The primary relationship is with the utility, not sort of ESO being able to sort of step in and directly control a EV charging.
Thank you. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Kieran. I'll jump to the CEV project and then come back to Crowdflex. It's one from me, actually. Can this framework be used to, refine whole system models that, for example, use like standard S-curves to forecast, demand set response or kind of other smart tech uptakes? Is that a planned use case for this?
Trying to think of the best way to answer that question, because we hadn't considered this from a whole systems perspective. That's not something that we'd necessarily thought of. Our thoughts along this were more along the lines of how, say, manufacturers of smart home technologies might be able to consider the things that users are impacted by and tell us through the different stages of the adoption journey. And that might actually mean that manufacturers of technologies, for example, could build in at the outset the questions to those, or actually some tweaks to whatever it is that they're designing in order to be able to meet those consumer needs. It's primarily a focus on the consumer more than anything else, so I don't think it's a perspective that we've considered. But if any of my other colleagues on the project wants to add anything, it's possibly something that we might take away. Keith's put his hand up.
Yeah, I'll be brave. Nice question, Manu. Thank you. It's a really interesting area. I mean, clearly from a networks perspective, we're really keen to understand the impact that these technologies will have, which is why understanding the challenges of adoption, where these technologies could make a significant difference to an end user's energy consumption, energy management, is important. It's important to capture all of that, but certainly in terms of the profiles, how a user engages with the various services, and we've heard some of these potentially new services described in the other projects. I think there is a link in there. It's understanding how best to articulate that. As Jess says, it wasn't first and foremost on our kind of hit list, I suppose, for Alpha, but we'd certainly welcome the conversation with some of the other groups to see how there might be some touch points there we can share learning and collaborate on.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Jess. So back to the Crowdflex project. The other question was, what type of data might you require beyond kind of energy data to create like a reliable and almost like a tight probability distribution function of different domestic flex? Is there a lot of metadata you need? So what are the key ones?
Yeah, I mean, so if you see this as the sort of three-step process that we talked about in terms of forecasting underlying demand, you know, like flexibility potential and expected outturn, I think forecasting demand is a very well-established discipline that you would look at kind of historical consumption data. Weather and temperature is a really important piece of that, and there might be individual variations. I think on the flexibility potential one, you can look at historical consumption. You can also look at kind of low carbon technology presence or absence, because it won't be a surprise to most people that electric vehicles and heat pumps, maybe home batteries to a more limited extent, but these are the things that are going to be driving the large amounts of load and the large amounts of flexible load in the home. And then on the third piece, the expected outturn, basically what we the way we approach that is over time you build up you can build up a more detailed picture of historical participation and historical depth, the type of interactions that a person has, like whether it's automated flexibility or tariff led or sort of one-off kind of individual manual response to those interventions. So on a household by household basis, you can build up quite a clear picture of what you think a customer is going to do on kind of any given day. So at that point, it just becomes a kind of like process to like try and interpolate what people are going to do. So if you have data, on a winter weekday between 4 and 5 p.m., like and like 7 till 8 p.m., how do you use interpolation to figure out what they're going to do 6 till 7 p.m.? These are all questions that we're actively working on.
Super. Thanks, Kieran. Maybe we'll finish off with kind of one last question to the CEV team. How do you validate such a framework? Is this, do you plan to track uptake across different trials? Is there a backcasting exercise you've planned? Like, how do you validate such a framework?
So we had a large number of attendees at our dissemination webinar for our discovery project, which ranged on a significant stakeholder mapping basis, so loads of different segments, and we've had a lot of interest in actually working with us on putting in those principles of co-design and actually working with stakeholders and users in order to make sure that things are effectively designed and work for designed to needs. And with that, we've also had offers, particularly from manufacturers of smart home technology, to start thinking about how we maybe test those solutions. So there's an example where there's a smart tech that's only available on the commercial market at the moment, and actually they'll start looking at how they've developed that product, how they market that product, and see what changes they would need to make in order to make that suitable for consumer market. That then allows us to test that with users through consumer engagement and to see if if they were provided with something as it currently stands versus after the application of our framework, how does their decision change in regards to adoption. And as it progresses to beta and we start talking about potentially prototyping some of those solutions that we may be able to develop, that gives us the opportunity to test those further in places such as the customer energy villages I've already referenced, and actually see if the real life application of those technologies can deliver the benefits that we believe that they can in regards to the direct and indirect benefits for consumers, so around affordability and improvements of health benefits and well-being, and also levels of comfort, and also things like the network impacts, so seeing changes in demand side response profiles and consumption overall. So we do have it's a rather longer term when you look at how the benefits can materialize from this project, but we do believe that just with the initial engagement, we can actually see a potential increase in the uptake of green technologies, of those that have been designed with users.
Good. Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of the Q&A. I think there's a couple more questions, but we'll make sure we'll send it over to you and then kind of get the answers out, and the recording will be available for everyone to look at. So yeah, thanks again, Jess and team. Thanks, Tina, Freddie and Kieran on the CrowdFlex project as well. Thanks for the presentations and your time in answering the questions. So we're going to move to well, it's not a 10-minute break anymore. because we're running a little late. It's probably more like a 6-minute break. So if we could rejoin at 2:45, that'll be great. And we can kick off the hydrogen integration session. Thank you so much, and see you in a few minutes.
Thanks, Manu. Can you put up the slide that holds the participants in the break?
Yeah, that's on. Can you see this, Chris? Should I reshare?
Yeah, reshare.
Oh.
Thanks, Manu.
Yeah. Hello, Manu.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Steve Johnston, National Grid.
Yeah, can see and hear you clearly.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. It's just, we're sat in like a big conference room, so I just want to make sure I test the levels.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Thank you.
Perfect. I think, yeah, we can start off again. So we are now going to move into the hydrogen integration team, which would be the set of 3 projects to finish off the whole systems integration round 1 discovery project show and tells. So I will now hand over to Steve to kick us off with the HyNets compression project.
Thank you, Manu. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Johnston, the Senior Innovation Specialist, and I'm here representing Lindsay Stevenson, who's been looking after the HyNTS compression project, and she's unfortunately on leave at the moment. So I'm stepping in to give you a brief overview on the NTS compression one. So I'm joined today by our project partners to give you an overview of the outputs of the project, as I say. So next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please?
I've moved it. I think it's a bit of lag. Let me start
okay.
sharing. Can you see that now, Steve?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So the national transmission system provides a resilient supply of natural gas to homes, businesses and industry across the UK, and we aim to provide the same capability for hydrogen. The compression system is needed to move the gas where it's required, depending on energy demand. The properties of hydrogen and natural gas differ. Hydrogen has a smaller molecule, lower density and lower calorific value. So all of these characteristics mean that more power will be required to compress hydrogen, and that the pressure ratio, which is currently achieved processing natural gas, cannot be achieved with hydrogen without modifications to the system. The compression system on the NTS consists of 24 compressor stations and approximately 70 individual compressor units. The cost to replace each of these compression units would be approximately 40 to 50 million pounds. The opportunity to repurpose the existing compression assets for use with hydrogen could significantly reduce the costs of the energy transition. The project then aims to assess the technical feasibility of repurposing compression assets for use with hydrogen, determine the potential cost savings and provide a demonstration of hydrogen compression at our future grid test facility at DMV Spade Adam. The project has included partners from Siemens Energy, DMV, Northern Gas Networks, SGN and ITM Power. Have the next slide, please. So the discovery phase of the project has included 6 work packages, which are shown here. Work packages 1 and 2 were the responsibility of gas transmission and metering and included project management and the development of project requirements. The requirements developed included assessing potential locations for a demonstration and defining the operational parameters of the demonstration. Work packages 3 and 4 were the responsibility of Siemens Energy and focused on the feasibility of repurposing existing compression assets for use with hydrogen, where work package 3 focused on compression drive systems and a work package 4 on the compressor itself. This included consideration of the impact which gas blends may have on the compressor and the potential for variability in gas blends. Although the main aim of the project was to repurpose existing assets, alternative options for the drive systems and compressors were also considered to ensure the most cost-effective, technically feasible option was chosen for demonstration. Lastly, work packages 5 and 6 were led by both National Grid and DMV, looking at the feasibility of building a compression facility at the Future Grid DMV test facility. This included defining all of the equipment required for the compression, assessing the volume of hydrogen required and the temperature effects which a compressor would have on a 1 kilometre pipeline loop. An initial assessment transportation feasibility assessment has also been undertaken, as very large, very heavy equipment will also need to be transported to the site for demonstration, and data was also gathered to begin to inform what the testing requirements for that demonstration might be. Can I have the next slide, please? So, to determine our user requirements for the hydrogen compression, the project reviewed modelling activities within gas transmission and metering, where it is likely that the first compression assets to be repurposed will be those located on Project Union, connecting the industrial clusters in the UK via a repurposed 100% hydrogen pipeline. The modelling is based on a system transformation future energy scenario, which includes potential energy demands of the future for heat, power and transport. The scenario which is being used assumes a large reduction in gas demand due to electrification. In the alpha phase, we are planning to expand our modelling activity to a variety of scenarios to determine the range of hydrogen compression requirements for the future. The project has also engaged with many stakeholders outside of the project partners to encourage discussion on the requirements of compression and how the project will ensure outputs are beneficial to the energy system. This has involved engagement with Ofgem, BEIS and the HSE. We have also engaged with gas turbine, electric drive system and compressor manufacturers to understand the range of technology available. As hydrogen production is reliant on uncontrollable factors in a blended natural gas future, there is the potential for varying gas composition across the network to be compressed. Alongside this, hydrogen and natural gas inputs are likely to sit in different locations, and users are keen on deblending gas compositions out of the network relevant to their needs. Initial work in the discovery phase has shown that this is feasible, and further work will be undertaken in the alpha phase. So I'd now like to hand over to Jörg Kiel of Siemens Energy. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Next slide, please. Okay, working packages 3 and 4 focus on the technical feasibility of reuse compressor and gas turbine driver for a new hydrogen operation conditions. Thermodynamic and material assessment were undertaken for 2 compressor units. They have the potential for a hydrogen modification. The compressor and turbine performance were checked for blends with 20 and 50% hydrogen and for pure hydrogen. The table shows the difference between in and outlet pressures. The differential pressures decreases for higher hydrogen contents. If the compression values for the 20 and 50% hydrogen blends can be accepted, there is a potential to reuse the natural gas compressors for the new hydrogen conditions. We will look into the next phase to check mechanical limits and will specify required modifications. For the compression of pure hydrogen, you can see that the pressure increase of only 1 bar was achieved for the De Laval compressor and 1.3 bar for the Dresser compressor. Both are not sufficient for pure hydrogen. A new concept is required. The assessment shows that the De Laval compressor was the most suitable one for re-engineering for the lower hydrogen blends. Next slide, please. A new, more powerful compressor design was created for pure hydrogen. The number of impellers in the flow path was increased from 1 to 4. To reach the necessary higher operating speed, an additional speed increasing gear was implemented. This hydrogen train achieves the same pressure ratio as the original design for natural gas. This high head design was recalculated for variable hydrogen blends. Gas compositions with 80 down to 60% hydrogen were possible with the speed range of turbine and compressor. After thermodynamical design of the compressor, the suitability of the gas turbine was checked. Siemens Energy and Avon gas turbines have the potential to run with hydrogen. The assessment found that the gas turbine can provide the power for the compression of 20 and 15% hydrogen blends and pure hydrogen. The completed discovery has shown that there is a high potential for installed rotating equipment on the National Transition System, NTS. This could provide significant cost savings. We will refine this in the alpha phase. Next slide, please, and transfer to another speaker.
You're on mute.
Apologies. Keith Armstrong, DNV. We were charged with work package 5, which was looking at the potential for hydrogen compression demonstration to be built at the future grid at DNV to Spade Adam. as the components associated with the compressor unit are very large and heavy, meaning the initial feasibility was required to ensure the assets could be transported to site and then installed in a suitable location on site. The compression demonstration consisted of a compression unit and a 36-inch diameter 1 kilometre pipeline loop with associated pig traps. A suitable location for the size of the demonstration was chosen, and 3 locations for the compressor unit was identified, as on the screen there, A, B and C. After a series of analysis of the suitability of each area, Area B was the one that was identified as being most suitable. As part of that feasibility study, we also looked at determining the possibility of the runtime of the compressor with the available hydrogen supply on site with the systems that exist with Future Grid. That would give us a runtime with hydrogen in the region of 31 minutes. If we increase the capacity of the hydrogen supply, we could increase that runtime up to probably 55 minutes. Part of the process of the feasibility also was looking at heat gain to the system, which would become a limiting factor in a closed loop system. That turned out to be the limiting factor in terms of runtime. That would limit us to about 13 to 20 minutes, and that identified the need of a heat exchanger to cool the gas during the testing. One of those has been identified as a repurpose asset that could do that, and something to look at going forward. The compressor unit could be fueled and run on site. The power requirements available to do that, and everything is a feasible option to install and run at speed up. So I'll hand back now to Jörg.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is fine. Gas turbine with hydrogen could eliminate the carbon dioxide footprint at compressor stations. Compression is required to build line pack for energy storage and for transportation. In a hydrogen future will be various fluctuating hydrogen production locations. Storage in NTS pipelines in time of low demand for use at peak demand will balance the future energy network. There are approximately 70 compressor units in the NTS, which would cost approximately 40 to 50 million pounds. From the discovery phase, we have found that it may be feasible to reuse existing compressors for hydrogen blends up to 50% in a constant volume flow scenario, and that around half of the existing gas turbines could be operated with hydrogen fuels. This could significantly reduce the cost of the energy transition. In the alpha phase, we will develop the benefit aspects further. We will find out which equipment could be reused, and we will specify the requirements for the new hydrogen equipment. Thank you. Maybe next page. Yeah.
So in the next phase of the project, we would like to undertake further modelling of the potential future energy demand scenarios. National Grid Energy Transmission will be joining the project as a project partner to help understand the potential interactions between future gas and electricity systems. This activity will also include ITM Power, NGN and SGN. This model will incorporate operational data from the national transmission system, local transmission system, distribution networks, and operational parameters and potential locations for electrolyzers. This model will help us to develop the potential requirements for hydrogen compression and whether compression will be required on LTS, NGN. On the LTS, NGNs can also be managed at hydrogen production facility. Cullum Dutenes have joined the project team to assess the suitability of ancillary equipment to be utilised for hydrogen and develop mechanical conceptual design for the hydrogen cab. Siemens Energy will develop conceptual designs for the modifications required to the gas turbine compressor system for compression of hydrogen, as well as develop a conceptual design for the 100% hydrogen compressor. DNV will assess the requirements for additional storage on site to enable us to fuel the gas turbines with hydrogen, and also refine the transportation feasibility assessment to develop a detailed transport plan. Conceptual design will be produced for the demonstration site, ready to begin a detailed design for the beta phase if successful. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now move to the next project, and then if I can just remind everyone to put your questions as they come in, and we'll finish the 3 presentations and then pause on a Q&A after these. So if I can hand over to Muhammad for the green hydrogen.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Hassan from CNG Services. Joining me is Alison, also from CNG Services. So I should also introduce Michael from Element Energy, and William, or Tara is it, from Centrica. So this project is, compared to the previous project, the scope of this project, we're looking at a megawatt scale. So in the NTS, you have hundreds of thousands, you can get hundreds of thousands of cubic meters an hour of gas flow. So we're looking at injecting green hydrogen into the NTS at around about 1 megawatt, so 200 cubic meters an hour. So if you can go to the second slide, please. Yeah, next one. Sorry, next slide.
I think there's a lag. Just bear with me for 1 second.
That's fine.
Does that come up for you now?
Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so currently there's a 0.1% limit of hydrogen, GSMR limit into the NTS. So if you have 200,000 cubic meters an hour flow, you can get 200 cubic meters of hydrogen injection currently, and that's equivalent to a 1 megawatt hydrogen electrolyzer. So I'm going to talk briefly describe the technical regime, and Element Energy and Centrica will cover the financial and commercial aspects of the project. So to summarize, the scope of the project can be simplified into the flow chart at the top. So electricity supplied from curtailed wind or solar is supplied to the electrolyzer. Water is also supplied from the mains. Water and electricity within the electrolysis process in the electrolyzer generates hydrogen. The NTS pressures that we are looking at is around about 70 bar. So we are looking to compress 30 bar from the electrolyzer output into up to 70 bar for NTS injection. Naturally, we'll have to measure the flow rate of the hydrogen that's being injected, and we'll have analysis points 20 diameters up and down of the NTS injection point to monitor the flow rates. That's the basic summary. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the way we did this project is we spoke to individual suppliers and manufacturers of each individual equipment. We worked with National Grid, SSEN, and all these companies to develop a technical regime that can take us into the alpha. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just to give some generic conclusions of what we found, it is feasible to inject hydrogen into the NTS currently. The 0.1% limit is not a barrier. We can inject 200 standard cubic meters an hour of hydrogen into the injection. It is also technically feasible individually from each on an equipment level and on in terms of consent. So the 100% hydrogen pipeline will be owned by National Grid, and there's no specific GSMR changes that will be required as that hydrogen is going to be blended into the NTS. So as mentioned previously, so So there's 4 NTS, the 4 NTS feeders in Scotland. The flow capacities are above 200,000 cubic meters an hour, which falls below, which we can start injecting as an example, inject hydrogen. One of the key requirements for the project is we need to know exactly what we're injecting into the NTS. So even though we know we're making hydrogen in the electrolyzer, we need to know what's, so say we produce hydrogen at 99.999%, what is that 0.0001%, what's that going in? So we spoke to manufacturers and identified what the contaminants may be and what contaminants can come from the compressors. And we identified that yes, it is possible. The contaminants we are looking at, so say for example, lubricant contaminants from a compressor, we can get oil-free, reciprocating, and diaphragm compressors, which are currently used for hydrogen. It is a bit of a challenge to get small compressors at the scale that we are looking at, but yes, we can get compressors with 0 oil contamination to get ultra pure hydrogen injected into the NTS. In terms of flow metering, there's a variety of things you can use, but the cheapest and for the accuracy that you can get is ultrasonic flow works fine. In terms of site selection, so the closer north you go, there's more wind farms is most optimal, and the feeders north is basically the optimal selection for the site selection. But we look more into that into the alpha phase. I'll pass over now to Michael. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Mohammed. Could we go to the next slide? Yeah, so I'll give a brief overview on some of the key insights from the element energy related work streams. Yeah, the first part of what we did was to generate several different electrolyzer connection arrangement scenarios, which differed with respect to the primary and secondary power sources connected to the electrolyzer, as well as the level of grid connection arrangement, as well as the battery storage, whether or not there's battery storage, and also the capacity of battery storage used. These were then modeled for a range of different electrolyzer capacities from 1 to 35 megawatts. Definitely, it's acknowledged that beyond a certain electrolyzer capacity will be close to breaching the GSMR, the current GSMR limit, but this was more just a proof of concept for the different range of electrolyzer capacities that we considered. So then we ran, for these scenarios and capacities, we ran a techno-economic analysis where we generated what the levelized cost of hydrogen production was, as well as the load factor for all these different scenarios and capacities. We found that an electrolyzer connected in a 1:4 ratio relative to renewable energy supply has well, it benefits from having the lowest levelized cost of hydrogen production, basically because it has a reasonable load factor and lowest cost of components relative to its hydrogen production. So at the chosen electrolyzer capacities that we looked at, we saw that, at the higher end of electrolyzer capacity, our hydrogen production can displace up to 44 kilotons of CO2 per year. Furthermore, at this capacity, if curtailed renewables are used at times when the connected renewable output is too low, there's at least some technical potential to reduce the curtailed energy by up to 90 gigawatt hours of energy per year that would have otherwise been curtailed. Now, we can't, consider these configurations without considering the revenue side of things. And so on that front, we looked at a potential CFD for hydrogen type of subsidy set at a strike price of £5 per kilogram, which is around about 12.7 pence per kilowatt hour. And that we saw that could result in a profitable project depending on the configuration and capacity. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, so in this diagram, we can see kind of what I was talking about, the economic performance in terms of cost of hydrogen across the varying different scenarios and electrolyzer capacities. What I'd draw your attention to is the last 5 scenarios, the last rows. So these rows are with scenarios with battery storage. And what we see is that even though add-in battery storage increases your load factor and thus your hydrogen production, that additional hydrogen production doesn't currently offset the costs of battery storage. So yeah, hopefully that kind of looks better as the battery costs lower over time. What we did find was that our best performance scenario was a 5 megawatt electrolyzer connected to a 20 megawatt wind farm, a 5 megawatt solar connection, as well as the potential for, exporting the excess renewable electricity to the grid. And that produced a levelized cost of 13.46 pence per kilowatt hour. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, lastly, we performed a sensitivity analysis on several sort of key parameters, namely like the electrolyzer capex and efficiency, the electricity cost, the battery cost, the capital structure, and whether or not there's curtailed renewables use. And using the best case for all these parameters, we were able to reduce our LCOH by about 27% to 9.8 pence per kilowatt hour. And that was relative to our hypothesized, base case parameter values. So even with a less favorable CFD strike price of something like £4 per kilogram, you could still have a profitable project. So basically, our main finding from the discovery phase is that there are some configurations of green hydrogen production that have a reasonable cost, but producers will only consider such a project with enough policy support. And with that, I'll hand over to Centrica, who will give us the commercial aspect.
Great, thank you. So Centrica's contribution focused around the offtake of hydrogen to customers. For this, we had some preliminary discussions with customers to gauge their interest in purchasing hydrogen from the grid, and there was a clear interest in them gaining more clarity on how they could do this. One thing that came up in our discussions was the importance for them to understand the origins of the hydrogen production, as well as identifying the carbon reductions that the hydrogen could provide them. So from this, we concluded that it was important that there was a robust certification process in place to provide the customers with the confidence that they needed to offtake the hydrogen. To help with this, we provided an overview of the verification process needed to produce a hydrogen certificate, along with an outline of the associated greenhouse gas emissions. And we drew comparisons from the biomethane sector and their certification process to do this. Another thing that came up with our conversations with the customers was that it was important that this solution was similar to the cost that they would be paying for natural gas, along with current decarbonisation solutions. So, for example, the cost of a biomethane certificate or a carbon offset credit. So to help ensure that the hydrogen was cost competitive, Centrica drew on its experience of optimising electrolyzers using excess power from renewable electricity. So ramping up the electrolyzer to produce hydrogen at times of low cost and excess renewables, and ramping down when power prices were high. So as I mentioned, this enabled the hydrogen to be cost competitive to other solutions. In terms of next steps, we'll look at establishing the rules of the certification process more clearly, and we hope to provide a mock audit of a hydrogen certificate. And we'll also go further in demonstrating how excess or curtailed electricity can be used to generate power through a virtual sleeving arrangement. So having the renewables supply a grid, and then that be virtually sleeved to the hydrogen production facility. So I'll pass back over to CNG now.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. So to conclude the project, I think we all enjoyed this project. We all want to take this project into the alpha phase. This includes Element Energy, Centrica, us, National Grid, Transmission, SSEN. We spoke to numerous people, and there are additional people who want to support the project into the alpha. So this includes the Renewable Energy Association, Gas Union Germany, who have completed a similar kind of project in Germany, and there's numerous UK consultants who wish to join. So to summarize the work streams, so we want to take the engineering into the next step, which is the FEED study. We'll work on, so prior to that, we'll work on the specification limit for H2 into the NTS, so the 0.1% limit, and build upon that, do a FEED study, and then from there, identify a pilot site and start producing some FEED layout drawings for an injection. To support all of this work, naturally, we will have a commercial regime, which Taras briefly spoke about, and financial support for H2 injection, which Element Energy, I believe, will head. Workstream 6. So for Workstream 6, we're looking at a specific area north of Dundee in the SSEN region for strategic investment of hydrogen. So this is it's a very how should I say, investment. There's quite a few investment opportunities there that we can make use of, and that's what we'll be doing in Workstream 6. So hopefully, I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sam and team. So we will finish the other presentation, and then we'll ask you to come online again for taking questions. So can I hand over to Sukhminder? Is it you be taking us through the presentation?
Yeah.
Over to you.
Right. Hi everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about the project that Braidslash have undertaken along with our project partners at National Grid Networks and Urenco and UK SMR. Next slide, please. So just want to start off the talk firstly saying that I'm presenting today instead of Anthony Reid, who has been the project manager for this particular discovery phase project. He is currently on paternity leave, but he's asked me to take his place, so I'll try do my best to fill his big boots. Next slide, please. So firstly, just want to talk a little bit about the overall objective and user requirements. So this project focused on the role that nuclear power could play in terms of hydrogen production in a net zero outlook. So the first thing we did was that we were tasked to essentially define a set of user requirements in terms of the low carbon hydrogen demand. Colleagues previously has mentioned that one of the first task really is understand the demand. So we've taken I'll present in a second some of the outcomes of that. Next, we looked at some of the options for siting of a nuclear power station that would generate hydrogen. So that would be different to the current kind of policy, mainly for two reasons. The project focused on advanced technology, so the smaller nuclear power stations that have different requirements in terms of where they need to be located. Secondly, we would aim to locate them where the demand is required. So it wouldn't be just based on nearing the coast, but where they're required in terms of industrial clusters. So we looked at the options in terms of siting nuclear power stations near the demand. We generated a set of criteria that we would look at in terms of what would identify as a good site, and then try to scan essentially the UK to identify where these sites could be, and determine essentially with some introductory network modeling to identify whether these sites would exhibit a problem for the current grid. And finally, we then consider some of the barriers that are currently in place in terms of producing hydrogen from nuclear power stations, using kind of simple PESEL analysis, and then also consideration of wider system integration issues. Next slide, please. So the first part of the project was to essentially forecast the hydrogen demand. Colleagues previously have used the FAIRS scenarios. We've decided to use the Bayes hydrogen strategy, and we ended up generating 4 scenarios in terms of both 2 in terms of the timescales of 2035 and 2050, and 2 different demand profiles. So the low demand essentially corresponds to an increased electrification across the UK, so homes heated by heat pumps more excessively, while the high demand essentially has more commercialization of hydrogen boilers, plus an increased kind of demand in terms of hydrogen required for synthetic fuels around aviation requirements. And we've been able to show where that demand will be required. So the eagle-eyed among you would have noticed that in the high demand scenarios, a lot of them are clustered around some of the current industrial clusters. And we've got transportation and aviation in terms of near London as well. Could that be hydrogen fuel cells as well for cars and for buses? So we generated our kind of demands, and they would support our future modelling assessment, which I'll come on to in a few slides. Next slide, please. We then engaged stakeholders around the kind of barriers that they perceive. So we split our kind of stakeholder group into 2 sets. Those of the kind of nuclear technology community and those of the kind of transmission community. So we surveyed over 20 participants for each industry, both giving various different views on it. So from the A&T perspective, the biggest and most important barriers that faced them was economic. So they didn't see any sort of policy blockers or any societal blockers, or as much as economic being the most important case. For the NTS, it was more the technical. So how could you connect a nuclear power station or generate hydrogen to the grid? So then that comes down to the kind of demand profile that could be generated that's required, plus the type of hydrogen that can be produced. So we engaged with a couple of advanced nuclear technology vendors, that be that UK SMR and Urenco, to understand the hydrogen they can produce in terms of high, medium and low. And we use that in our network modelling to then assess the kind of technical barrier there. Another couple of things that came out from the discussions was that policy was also quite important across the patch. So the kind of policy steps in terms of both regulatory engagement between Bayes and Ofgem about who would oversee such a facility, and also in terms of the policy, in terms of the framework for how best to engage in terms of a plant that could generate both electricity and hydrogen at the same time. So the framework of policy that would allow those kind of plant developers to be suitably kind of reimbursed for those kind of capabilities. Next slide, please. So our network impact assessment essentially focused on the ability to use the current NTS to firstly provide the required demand in various areas, and B then would look into whether the application of a advanced nuclear technology providing hydrogen, what it would have on the network. So it's worthwhile just starting off by saying that we've kind of defined based on the kind of flow rate requirements and kind of like peak flow rates that each part of the network could actually deliver. So the demand is based on the Bayes hydrogen strategy demand that I outlined before. The kind of supply is limited by the network in terms of the flow rates that it can provide based on the kind of geometry of the pipe currently. We've got an example there where we've got 2 areas where the demand couldn't be fulfilled, and that's across the whole network, and those are just two small areas where essentially the reason why was to do with the flow rate was restricted by the current pipework. So, but apart from those two areas, the model was able to solve. So it gives us some confidence that the current network would be able to provide at a high level. It looks like it can provide the high framework of the demand required to meet the demand, supply required to meet the demand. We then added sort of the flow rates of hydrogen that could be provided by an advanced nuclear technology to see the impact it would have. So there was a concern that due to the amount of hydrogen an advanced nuclear technology could produce in one particular time, the demand would be too high, then it would be able to actually facilitate that kind of demand. We didn't find that was an issue. Actually, we found that the current grid was able to handle the amount of hydrogen produced and able to distribute it accordingly to various demand sites. Next slide, please. We then looked at the siting potential for nuclear power stations. So the map on the right, the kind of green dots are current nuclear sites identified in the National Policy Statement. We then looked at, based on both kind of a survey of the local facilities on per site in terms of the location relative to electricity substation and location based relative to the demand requirement and the kind of network gas network framework and structure around there in terms of identifying sites that would be advantageous for deploying advanced nuclear technologies in the future to meet hydrogen demand. We use two different methods of both vectorization and rasterization, essentially two different ways of finding optimal points in a map. And you can see on the right that we have identified a number of sites that were kind of near what would be ideal for future deployment of advanced nuclear technologies in terms of meeting the hydrogen demand expected in the future. And you can see there's a few areas where the green dots and the blue dots or the red dots are quite close together. So that represents a place where there's already a kind of either a nuclear power station there, or the National Policy Statement identifies this as a future site. Therefore, that would be kind of an advantageous place to start building if you were going to build in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to kind of summarize some of the key points then on the project. So in terms of the requirement for hydrogen in the future, the obvious candidate in terms of who would adopt hydrogen as a 100% level would probably be the most energy intensive industries when we did our survey. So when we did our surveys of various clusters, they seemed most keen to use hydrogen based on the fact that they are going to be quite difficult to electrify. So based on the analysis that we did for siting, Teesside, Humberside and Merseyside are actually close to sites that are potential nuclear power station suitable in the future. So that provided a good conclusion in terms of where you could site ANTs in the future, and there'll be a requirement for them. The network impact analysis in terms of demonstrating that ANTs wouldn't be disruptive in terms of the ability to discharge the hydrogen produced didn't show any sort of barriers in that. As noted by our previous colleagues, there needs to be more work done in terms of understanding the kind of role hydrogen can play in the network and how you would distribute it. So the work on compressors and optimizing those compressors in terms of where they need to be as well in comparison to where the demand is and where the supply is as well. So there needs to be more network modeling done there. But at a high level, advanced nuclear technologies wouldn't be disruptive on a 100% hydrogen network. And the final conclusion just around the kind of barriers to it, there were no barriers in terms of policy and regulatory barriers. So it's more around just the implementation and consultation that needs to be done. So ensuring that the National Policy Statement for both hydrogen and for future nuclear sites is open to the kind of allowance that you could have a nuclear power station that produces both electricity and gas and both hydrogen as required. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Upinder. If I can invite all the other presenters to come on video, and now we can move into the Q&A session. Thank you. Give you guys a few seconds. So maybe we'll just start with the high NTS compression, and I'll kind of work my way through the projects, and then we'll see how many we can get through. So yeah, just to the high NTS compression project. First of all, do you assume hydrogen blend volumes are similar to the current natural gas or significantly lower in the future? If lower, does the system need as much line pack storage, hence the current national grid pressure levels, or could a smaller demand live with lower pressures?
Yeah, I've got a bit of a quick answer for that one. We, as part of the high NTS discovery project, we modelled under the future energy scenarios, just one scenario. As part of the alpha phase, we're looking to branch out and do some more modelling scenarios. And as part of that alpha phase, we'll answer that exact question, to be honest. So it's a good question, and we'll be answering that in the alpha phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So if I move to the green hydrogen injection project, if you only use curtailed electricity, does this not decrease the utilization of the electrolyzer and hence increase its capital cost?
Do you want to take that, Michael, or should I take it?
Yeah, I can take that. So yeah, in a case where you have an electrolyzer only connected to, well, only using curtailed electricity, yes, I can imagine that your load factors won't be very high, and so obviously the expense of electrolyzer and ancillaries would definitely well, the hydrogen production from that wouldn't offset those costs. But if you look at a scenario where you're comparing a fully grid connected electrolyzer that's just drawing power at the the normal import fees, that's definitely more expensive than at times when at times when you have available curtailed energy, you're importing at those cheaper rates. You're able to definitely lower your cost of production if you use curtailed energy in that sense. But definitely you need to satisfy a base sort of load factor to make money off an electrolyzer. If anyone wants to add, yeah, feel free.
Yeah, just a small add-on. So curtailed electricity, there's still a cost for it. You still have to pay for it, even if you make something. Even if you make something, you're not going to give it away for free. So there's still a curtailed cost, and sometimes, as Michael expanded on, the load factor can be higher, so there's more capex cost. Thanks. Hope that answers it.
Thanks, Hassan. So moving on to the nuclear project then. So would the advanced nuclear technology and hydrogen production for industrial clusters be an alternative to natural gas with CCS, or would it be complementary to it?
Yep, so it's a good question, and it very much depends on probably two things. Firstly, for each individual cluster, the kind of overall requirements. Some clusters now are trying to work with more demand side management. So if you're working in a more demand side management role, you might think that natural gas to CCUS is better because you can switch it on and off. ANTs have the advantage of doing that as well, but I think they would work better if you were having a longer kind of load profile. Second thing as well is the overall hydrogen demand that's required at a site. ANTs have a very small footprint, so you could produce a lot of hydrogen for that small footprint as well. So if space is a consideration in terms of the natural gas kind of requirements as well, in terms of CCUS plant combined with the natural gas plant, to how much size it takes and how much you need, it does need to be considered like that. They can complement each other. So certain designs like the UK SMR design, it could potentially be producing electricity instead of producing hydrogen. Instead of powering an electrolyzer, it can just sell that grid or do private wire to local industrial clusters as well. So the advantage of advanced nuclear technologies is that flexibility. So depending on the kind of framework of kind of economics that are operating at that time. So just as the example there, we're talking about whether it's curtailed wind, curtailed renewables in terms of the pricing, advanced new technologies have the flexibility just to kind of move with the time. So it might help in terms of flattening the kind of cost of operating the cluster at the time as well. So it can be quite complementary.
Thanks, Akwinder. So maybe moving on back to Stephen on the compression project. You said hydrogen compression is more energy than gas. Can you indicate how much? Example, how much energy per ton of hydrogen?
Yeah, whilst I can't say by how much, but we do know that the molecule size for hydrogen is 3 times smaller than methane. So therefore, you may need 3 times the amount of hydrogen to transport the same amount of net thermal energy. Plus, of course, we found as part of the high NTS compression project is the fact that in order to transport that amount of additional volume of gas, you need to increase the tip speed of the compressor. And in order to increase the tip speed of the compressor, you may need a gearbox between your power turbine and the gas compressor itself. So we're looking at that as part of the alpha phase of the project as well, and what you may or may not need to do as part of the increasing the tip speed of the compressor.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. So the next one on the green, I think it is for the green hydrogen injection project, and apologies if it's not. Are you planning to look beyond the 0.1% hydrogen blend? If not, what happens as the natural gas demand drops? Your supply opportunity ceiling will also drop.
Yeah, I can take that. So short answer, yes, we are looking at this in the alpha. For the first part of the question, are you planning to look at beyond 0.1%? So yes, we are. We'll be looking to expand on that in the alpha part of the project. And the second part of the question, so let's say, so the way we are designing this project, so assume that tomorrow there's no more gas. So the way we are designing this is we will minimize the stranded assets that we'll have. We can the electrolyzers will be we will be able to move the electrolyzers to another site. We'll be able to move the compressor to another site, and we will try to use an existing connection into the NTS. So assuming in the worst case scenario there's no demand, which is not forecasted, everyone's still using gas for and probably will be using it for quite a while now. Short answer, probably won't happen, but if it does happen, we've planning to design around it.
Can I just add to that? So currently, because of the gas safety management regulations, we can only inject 0.1% in. Those are looking to change in 2025. So we will, by that stage, if some of the flow rates go down, we will be able to inject more hydrogen into the gas stream. So the percentages will go up, hopefully, at that time.
Great. Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Alison. Back to the nuclear project then, I guess is one from myself. Does adding kind of hydrogen production technologies to advanced nuclear tech, does it kind of increase the risk and cost of financing to the new technology, or is it seen as a kind of positive addition?
Great question. So it's a fairly nuanced answer to that is that it depends on the type of technology. So in terms of the hydrogen production, so the current technology we're talking about now is around electrolyzers, so either high temperature steam or low temperature electrolysis electrolyzers. So those plants can be, because it's just an additional use of the electricity that's around and using some of the waste heat that's produced anyway by nuclear, it's actually seen as it's not really much of a increase in risk. It just needs to be managed in terms of where you site it next to the plant itself. So it increases the opportunity for usage of it, so it's seen as a benefit. The terms of hydrogen production methods that are being kind of discussed for some nuclear power plants looks at a very different kind of model in terms of, rather than using electrolysis, they're looking at more chemical production. So in terms of using much higher heat and water and various kind of catalyzers to essentially make a more efficient production method than electrolysis. So you would produce more hydrogen than compared to electrolyzer at a more efficient rate. However, they use more as they generate more focus on heat rather than electricity and waste heat that some would use. So their business model is more intertwined with essentially being either a heat provider or a dedicated hydrogen provider. So there's again less of a risk in terms of coupling the two together, but the business model for that changes. So you've got two different technologies with two different kind of business models.
Yep, thanks, Sukhminder. So going up back to the compression project, again, one from me. So is there any issues for the compression if the hydrogen blend changes over time? For example, within a day, or does it not matter?
Yeah, as a complementary project to the high NTS compression project, we're looking at some other project funded through the NIA mechanism, and that is looking at the variability of blends of hydrogen and methane and how that affects the compressor envelope, and that's feeding into this project as well. So, like you quite rightly say, the variability of that mixture could change hour by hour. So we're looking at what impact that would have on the compressor envelope.
Oh, great. Okay, so it's been covered in another project, but you're taking into account.
Yes, but feeds into this project as well.
And then on the hydrogen injection one, so have you considered any system services that are being provided by electrolyzers? I guess there are kind of two immediate impact I can think of. One on the commercials, the electrolyzers are starting to provide system services, and two on the output of the hydrogen itself and what it does to your configuration. So is that considered, or is electrolyzers just producing hydrogen, not providing any services?
So by that, I assume you mean oxygen production?
No, just I mean frequency response. So just using electrolyzers to provide balancing services, for example, that adds revenue to your electrolyzer, but it has implication on hydrogen purity, etc.
No, we've not looked at that directly. It's not part of the original discovery scope. The electrolyzer itself will use say a curtailed wind or solar electricity, but it can be supported by grid. The idea is to only use hydrogen for injection on the site, as this will be a dedicated site for hydrogen injection only. Anything in excess, such as oxygen, will be vented. So short answer, no. Hope I've answered that correctly.
Thanks, Hassan. No, I think that's just a clarification question on whether there are additional value stacks you've seen for the electrolyzers. But...
Sorry, I think Tara has something to say.
Yeah, sorry, I could just add something that we're looking at in the alpha phase is in Centrica in Denmark, we're looking at kind of rapid response electrolyzers that are optimized, as I kind of mentioned, based on power prices. And that's a service that we look to provide in Centrica. So it's something that will work more in the alpha phase with it, showing the rapid response of electrolyzers and how they can be optimized. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Tara. And then the last one, I think for nuclear, is the consideration that the hydrogen would be produced as almost like a baseload output out of the nuclear, and in which case is there a big implication for hydrogen storage, given kind of demand is, well, we don't exactly know what demand profile is going to look like in the future, or is it more kind of on demand production of hydrogen, or is it still open on what config that looks like?
It's more open, to be honest. So it is very much dependent on the end kind of demand requirement. So some nuclear power stations are able to do it based on sort of the end user requirements. So if an industrial cluster needs it only for like 18 hours a day, they'd be able to produce hydrogen at the kind of required purity, and then they can just switch off and either provide electricity at the base load, or if you needed to start supporting storage requirements, then it would depend on, again, where you would store the hydrogen. There's a lot of unknown at the moment in terms of how best to store hydrogen, how much you can store, in terms of even if for seasonal kind of variations, in terms of if you wanted to store hydrogen that you produce from excess renewables in the summer, how long can you store it for in terms of winter usage? So I know it's going to sound like a very just non-committal answer, but it is kind of very much dependent on that. So again, nuclear has that flexibility because it can turn into electricity production for some of them, so they would be better suited. Other ones are actually, you could, instead of producing hydrogen, you could produce ammonia. So again, because of the high heat that nuclear power stations can produce, you could actually use it to instead of produce hydrogen, produce ammonia, which is easier to store and has other uses as well. So it's very, sorry, again, it's a bit of a meandering answer. It just depends.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. I might extend that question to the other teams as well, because I think Stephen, in your project, you mentioned that there is an additional hydrogen storage requirement when you move to hydrogen compression. How does that figure in your plans going forward on hydrogen storage, and similarly to Hassan as well? How much?
Yeah, so we also have another NIA project looking at hydrogen storage and how we would store that for fueling a gas turbine, and how much you would need to store to fuel a gas turbine over a range of scenarios. So we've got another project looking at that, which also feeds into this project as well.
Okay. So would that be part of your alpha or beta going forward? So the hydrogen storage in the site be part of the demo or no?
It will then eventually be part of the demo. They will sort of culminate into the demonstration as part of the beta phase. But obviously the HINTS compression project under alpha has a watching brief on the other projects as well, because they all sort of feed in and dovetail together.
And actually just one more clarification as well. So would the modified turbine also be part of the demonstration, or just the gas compression unit?
What was that again? Sorry, I didn't quite hear.
The modified turbine to produce the powers to run on hydrogen, would that be part of the demo, or would you still be using a natural gas turbine to power the?
We'll still be using the existing gas turbine that comes as the rotating machinery package, albeit the fuel system to that may be modified to accept hydrogen, like we've done under the separate NIA funded project. And then the current rotating compression part of it under this project will remain the same, whereby we may need to modify that when we start to increase the blend levels up around 25–30% because of the effects on the envelope.
Got it. Thanks, Stephen. And then, finally to Hassan and team on just, have you considered hydrogen storage? And one other question as well, the last one on, I think Tara mentioned the kind of hydrogen certifications. Have you looked at other carbon or other certification mechanisms and spoken to organizations of expertise in them as you kind of go forward, thinking about, what kind of certifications look like for hydrogen?
So I'll start off. In terms of storage, we don't really want storage as part of the design. It adds an additional aspect into the design. So we will have a minimal amount of storage below ground, a buffer storage between the electrolyzer and compressor. So this storage, the purpose of this storage is just to optimize the operation between the electrolyzer and compressor, but it's not a lot. We don't want storage on site. Thanks, and over to you, Tara.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer the second part. So for the discovery phase, we focused more around kind of the certification that would be needed to prove to the customer the origins and the greenhouse gas emissions of generating the hydrogen. I think in the alpha phase, we'll maybe look further and explore other kind of certification mechanisms in terms of like voluntary carbon credits. So yeah, that's something that we're kind of going to explore more in the alpha phase.
Understood. Thank you so much. So I think we've come to the end of the Q&A. Thanks for patiently answering all the questions. So thanks, Stephen and Keith on the first project, and then Hassan, Tara, and Alison, and Michael, and then Sukhbinder on the nuclear project. Thank you so much. To finish off, I think we mentioned this. We've launched the second round of SIF. So if you're interested in SIF, you're interested in developing projects, come talk to us. I think, Chris has kindly put the links in the chat. So we've launched the challenges for round 2. It's going to focus on 4 main areas: supporting a just energy transition, preparing for a net zero power system, improving energy system resilience and robustness, and acceleration of decarbonization of major demands. If you want to hear more, do join us in the official launch this Wednesday. Again, you can find the link to kind of join that briefing session to come hear more, ask questions, and then feel free to get in touch with us if you want more information. And please do sign up for the newsletter. It's the best way to get information and updates from us. Otherwise, thanks again to everyone who dialed in. Thanks again to all the presenters and then the project leads and the networks. It's been super interesting, and really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing how these develop.
Thanks,
everyone. Thank you, Manu. Thank
you. Take care.
Bye now. Bye.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Goran. Take care. Bye.
Good work, Manu.
Yes, thank you.